stubby lettuce plants. I'll admit it, they're little stubby guys. I've been growing them for almost 60 days hydroponically outside, and I should have big, beautiful, full heads of lettuce, but I don't. I have little stubby plants. And I thought to myself, what has happened to bring us to this point? Like, what mistakes have been made or not made, things that I've not done, to allow us to arrive at the point where instead of having a big salad, I have little stubby lettuce plants. And I came up with a list of 5 or 6 things that I did wrong. When you hear this list, there's really no other reaction than the Captain Picard facepalm. And I know you've all made stupid mistakes growing things or in your gardens or hydroponically or whatever. I'd love to hear about those in the comments below. But these are just dumb things that I didn't anticipate. Now, I've had an outdoor garden for years, right, where I put my fingers in the dirt. There's actual dirt, and I can get dirty, and things grow, and it rains and whatever else on them. And I know what to expect there. These problems occurred, and these mistakes happened because I took my indoor garden, my indoor setup, my experiences indoors hydroponically, and I tried to do it outdoors. And I just didn't mentally connect the two scenarios. So here we go. Let's talk about it. Number 1. No, we're going to count backwards from number 5 to number 1 because everybody loves to count down. Everybody loves to see what that number 1 thing is. Number 5, the sun. I started my plants in early August. It was 80 degrees, and I thought, great, this is good lettuce growing weather. It'll cool down as we coast into fall, and this lettuce will thrive and flourish. Well, instead of cooling down, it heated back up to about 100 degrees Fahrenheit, which is super hot, and lettuce doesn't really like it when it's that hot. So I didn't anticipate the heat being a problem when it was. So I scrapped that, and I waited a few weeks, and I started again in early September. The problem this time was we had unseasonably cool temperatures, and as the sun went down at night, the temperatures cooled down, and the lettuce was kind of stunted. I was used to growing inside where 70 degrees, 45, you plant your seeds, 45 days later you have a giant head of lettuce, and that's that. Outside, different story, different growth patterns. I've had this experience in my garden, my dirt garden, but not hydroponically, and I didn't really, my expectations were not in alignment, if you will. So, now another problem that you may have if you grow outside, there's an airplane. Another problem you may have with the sun if you're growing outside is heat. The sun produces a lot of heat, and it will shine down in your reservoir and heat that solution up. And as the solution heats up, the level of oxygen in the water goes down. Think of it like you've got a warm bottle of soda. You pour it in a glass, and tons of bubbles come out. And or a cold bottle of soda, you pour in a glass, fewer bubbles. That's because the colder solution is able to hold on to that dissolved gas more easily than the hot solution. Same thing with your hydroponics reservoir. Temperature goes up, oxygen goes down, which produces a problem because it allows bad bacteria, root rot, other things like that to occur which don't otherwise occur in the presence of oxygen. So you have to oxygenate your solution, you have to cool it actively, you have to do something to keep that temperature down and oxygen in the water. And not something I have to do so much in the basement because I don't have those temperature fluctuations or I don't have the problems with the heat. You might, but not to the extent that you do if you're growing in sunlight. Another thing you can do if you're growing outside to avoid these kinds of problems is use a different type of setup. Use something where your roots are not submerged in water, like a Dutch bucket or an ebb and flow or an NFT or NTF or whatever it is. I get that mixed up all the time. Something where the roots are not submerged in water and you won't really have as many problems. I did Dutch buckets in the garden a few years ago, tomatoes, and the roots were not submerged in the water. The reservoir temperature got up to about 80 degrees. In the hot days, it was probably 85 degrees, but it didn't matter because 1, the tomatoes used the water so fast that nothing bad could grow in there, and 2, the roots were not submerged in the water. The water would go through the medium, it would drain out, would draw oxygen into the root zone, and I didn't have any problems. So it's really more of a problem when the roots are submerged. Number 4, wind. Not generally as much of a problem in my outdoor garden, but I didn't anticipate it being a problem in my hydroponic garden. I had 20, 30 mile an hour gusts one day as the storm was blowing in, and 30 miles an hour, for those of you that are using the metric system, is like 1,200 kilometers a day. I think that's how you measure wind speed, in kilometers per day. Anyway, I come home from work, and one of the lids has blown completely off the container and is laying on the grass and has strewn hydrogen and seedlings all over the grass, and they're dead. And I thought, well, that's just fantastic. So I reseeded, and I grew some new stuff, but I don't really have a lot of wind in my basement. Another problem with the wind is, and I didn't have this problem this year, but I did in my Dutch buckets. When on a hot, windy day, that plant really wants a lot of water. The water will transpire through the plant very quickly. And on those days, it doesn't need more nutrients, it needs more water. So 1, you've got to make sure you have enough water, which I did not. And 2, you can also lower the concentration of nutrients in your solution, make it easier for the plants to absorb water. Not something that you have to really deal with indoors. Like, you don't have to worry about the changes in transpiration rates on a daily basis. You may, as the plants mature, reduce the nutrient concentration to allow the water to flow through more quickly, but not on a daily basis like you do if you're outdoors. Number 3, rain. About a week after I've reseeded, I've got these little seedlings coming back up, and I come home from work, and it has rained. And it doesn't rain a ton where I live. We get maybe 14, 15 inches of rain a year. But we got a big rainstorm. We've got almost an inch in a very short period of time. And it has filled my containers to the top. And since I don't have a big root mass down there holding these things down, it has washed the hydrogen away, it has washed the baby seedlings away. And again, they're dead. So I have to reseed again. I thought to myself, well, that's just great. That's not something I have to deal with very often in my basement. There's no rainstorms downstairs, and if there is, I've got different problems. But I don't have to deal with that inside. I could have probably protected them with some shade cloth or something over the top, but I just didn't anticipate the rain being this much of a problem. Additionally, rain can affect the pH of your water. It can affect the nutrient concentration of your water. So even if I had had that root mass down there, it may have diluted my solution. It may have raised or lowered the pH, something you just need to take into account and check for after a rainstorm. Again, when I was doing my tomatoes outside, they used the water so fast that it wasn't really a problem if the rains filled it up or washed it out or whatever, and since they weren't in the solution, it didn't really matter. But in the case where I had little seedlings of lettuce, it mattered. Number 2, sun, wind, rain, hail. Number 2, hail. I come home from work about a week later. Let me back up. Since I had reseeded, I put 4 or 5 seeds in each pot, and the rain destroyed 3 of them. And so I took very carefully seedlings out of the one remaining pot, and I replanted them into the other 3 net cups. So I've got 4 again, right? And I come home from work one day, and it has hailed, and I don't work very far from my home, and there was no hail where I worked, and there was no hail in the forecast. But I come home and it has hailed, and it has beat the crap out of the plants that survived, and it has blasted one of them completely out, and is laying there dead. And I'm thinking, oh, hail? No. I did get to make that joke. That was the bright spot. But I'm thinking, I don't have a lot of hail in my basement. So watch the weather. Again, shade cloth probably would have protected against this, covering them somehow, but it did trash my garden, which, I can't say my outdoor garden was immune from this, but it was the end of fall, and it was okay. I didn't really care. But for my new seedlings that I was trying to grow, it was a problem. Number 1. Now, this one I sort of cheated on. I didn't have this problem with these particular plants, but I can envision, had I planted these in the spring, it would have been a problem. They would have been all over it. And I'm talking about snails. In the springtime, when it rains a lot, snails come out in force, and they destroy my garden. They will come and they eat my cucumbers, and they eat my lettuce, and they eat my tomato leaves, and whatever else they can find, and it's just a problem. They slither up with their little slimy trails, and they don't even try to get away with it. Like, they're not even trying to be sneaky, and then they slither away after they eat everything. And no matter what I do, I put the bait out, or I try to trap them, or I put the eggshells down, nothing seems to protect them 100%. They always get something. And if you've got slugs, I'm sorry, slugs are like a grosser version of a snail. They're the worst. If you're growing outside, keep in mind there are critters, there are snails, there are aphids, there are bugs, there are toddlers, there are who knows what else, mountain lions. There are things that live outside, so take that into consideration of where you put your containers, what protections you do for them. Make sure they're not by like a big snail lair or wherever snails live. I don't have a lot of snails in my basement. I don't have a lot of aphids or bugs or anything else in my basement, really. No mountain lions. I do have toddlers. That's a problem sometimes, but not really, as much as you might think. If I ever have a snail in my basement, it will be a bad day, and I hopefully not as much for me as it is for the snail. But snails are much worse than spiders. I have spiders down there, but no snails. And I want you to do a little thought experiment and a little imagination with me. Imagine you're laying in bed, and you wake up in the middle of the night, and you look over, and the person's sleeping next to you, and their mouth is open, because nobody looks good when they're sleeping. They got their mouth open, and there's a spider crawling down their face, and the spider leg kind of just goes just inside their mouth, as they have a gape, and they brush it away, and you're like, oh, spider, gross, right? Now replace the spider in your mind with a snail sliding down their face, or a slug, and their little eyeball antenna things like just kind of go inside the corner of their mouth. That's much worse. Much, much worse than a spider, I promise you. Snails are worse than spiders. Anyway, you're outside. Things live outside. Things eat your lettuce other than you. And now the zeroth thing. I did promise you 5 or 6. So the 0th thing is late October, when it should have been great lettuce growing weather where I live. I've had Octobers where it's been like 70 degrees days every day, 50 degrees at night, 40 degrees at night. Perfect weather, perfect lettuce growing weather. This year, coldest October ever. Coldest night in October ever. And I knew these lettuce plants were going to make it, so I kind of did this one on purpose. I'm like, well, let's just see what happens, right? It got down to 8 degrees Fahrenheit, which is like 14 degrees below 0 Celsius, about 20-ish degrees below freezing. And I thought, well, let's see how cold hardy these things really are. And surprisingly, they survived. they survived. Like, they got kind of beat up and they would probably never recover from it. I should have taken them inside had I wanted them to live, but I didn't because I knew they weren't going to make it. So I just wanted to see what they would do. They surprisingly survived. I was amazed. 8 degrees Fahrenheit, 20 degrees below freezing. They survived. So I think we're done here. We talked about the sun, the moon, the rain, the wind, the stars, the mountain lions, the toddlers, the cougars, both kinds. You're outside. Things happen. Hopefully I can save you some time. Hopefully this has been helpful for you. I think the real number one problem is probably heat. Heat, I think, is the biggest problem in hydroponics if you're growing outside. All these other things will happen, but I think heat will get almost everybody every time if you're not careful. So take that into consideration. Hopefully I can save you some time. If it was helpful, give it a thumbs up, share it with a friend, and thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye-bye.